everyone. Welcome to another Tell Me More, the Guardian Australia's live chance for you to ask all of your burning news questions to the people that, actually wrote that news in the first place. I'm joined by the brilliant political reporter, Krishani Dhanji. How are you going today?
Hello, Matilda. Good. How are you?
Good. How has your very politics-filled weekend been?
Look, I was not reporting, which was kind of nice for me, but inevitably spent the vast majority of my weekend stuck on the live blog, just kind of following everything and reading everything I could possibly get. So very politicky.
Yeah. So sort of the election nightmare. For people who haven't watched before, you are more than welcome to leave your questions as the live stream goes along. Ask anything you want. Today we're talking a lot about the Liberal and Labor campaign launches and why in week 3 of the election we're having a campaign launch. So if you have any questions about some policies that came up there, leave those. If you just have general voting questions, general political questions you want to ask, you can leave that in the comment section for the TikTok and the YouTube live stream. If you're on Instagram, you will just have to use the question submission in our Instagram story. To get us started, I think, really, can we ask that question that I did just ask? What do you mean we've just had the campaign launches for Liberal and Labor?
Yeah, no, it's such a good question. You're like, hang on, haven't we been going for 3 weeks already? Basically, the
I feel like
PM
we've been going for
calls.
3 years.
Yeah, I feel like I've been here forever. But yeah, the PM calls the election and says, here is the date that we're going to have it, and we start campaigning from now. But the actual campaign launch is really when the parties use all the sort of momentum that they can get to launch these like big policy platforms. But crucially, it also ends the taxpayers paying for their campaign. So at the moment, well, prior to the launches, taxpayers were still paying for political staff, and they were also paying for the leaders to be travelling around in their planes. Basically, after the launch, that stops, and then they have to use their money, donations that they've received, all that sort of stuff, to then pay for their own staff and pay for their staff to fly around with the leaders.
And there was a lot of sort of policy announcements, which we'll get to soon, but is this like that's the breadth of it? This is everything that we're going to hear, or will there still be more campaign political, election promises made in the sort of weeks to come?
This is definitely the big one, but we're still expecting some stuff to come a little bit later as well. It's a really interesting time. So, I mean, in terms of the timing, the parties tend to try and leave it kind of later, as late as they can in a way, because obviously they don't really want to be spending as much money from their own coffers as they might want to from, having the taxpayer pay for their staff. So they tend to leave that quite late. But with the timing of this election, two things. There's the Easter long weekend and the Anzac Day weekend. So that kind of means that people really switch off at those times. People are still on school holidays, they're away, they're not paying any attention. But the other thing is that now that people are voting a lot earlier, they kind of need to really respond to that and get those big election pledges out early so that people are going to the ballot box, maybe a couple of weeks in advance, knowing what they're voting for. But in terms of what we can still expect, we know that the Liberal Party has sort of given us a bit of a forward sizzle on defence spending. They've said that they're going to announce a much bigger spend for that, and that's one of the things that they've said they really differentiate between the Liberal Party and the Labor Party. So that's one of the things that we're still looking forward to. The Liberal Party's also said that they're going to release some more of their costings, particularly on their sort of work from home policy. So those kinds of things we'll still get to see in the next few weeks as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'll ask about that later. It seemed like there was a lot of details TBC with them. Before we get into, I guess, the nitty-gritty of what was announced, I thought it was interesting, and I've seen a few people questioning this about, can you tell us what the significance is of where each of these campaigns were held? Labor in Perth, Liberals in Western Sydney. That's not just an arbitrary choice, I'm guessing.
No, it's a really, really considered one. The teams will sit down and have a think of where are they best placed to really draw in those audiences that they want. And so Labor selected Perth, and they did that because they did that back in 2022, and that essentially won them the election back then. WA is really, really crucial for Labor's chances, and they know that they're popular there, particularly with Roger Cook. And formerly, at the time in 2022, it was Mark McGowan, who was so popular. And so those are the seats that they really, really need to be able to hold and keep from the Liberal Party. There are a couple there that, they're hoping that they might be able to win, like Bullwinkle, for example. It's a new seat, but it's notionally Labor, so they're pretty hopeful that they might be able to clinch that too, add one to their bag.
So just to clarify, there was a sort of redistribution. The AEC, which is an independent commission, looks at everything, tries to break up all the electorates to be sort of generally comparative, like the number of people living there. And that ended up being, I think it was one got scooted away from Sydney and one got plonked in Eastern. Is it whereabouts in Perth is Bullwinkle? It's
sort of like quite out kind of regional, so it's right on the sort of suburban outskirts of Perth on the eastern side. But yeah, there were two seats. There was North Sydney, and there was also Higgins in Victoria, in Melbourne.
Yeah, for sure. And so even though, like, notionally Bullwinkle hasn't existed before, from what we know about the people that live in that area, it seems fairly safe for Labor. Is that the vibe?
I wouldn't say fairly safe, like it's still within a couple of percent margin, and the Liberal Party and the Nationals Party are both running. The Nationals are running Mia Davies, who's a former leader of the Nationals in their state party. So they're also pretty keen and feeling, somewhat hopeful of being able to make a pretty big dent in that area as well. But generally what the AEC would do is say, okay, well, we've taken out these sections from this seat and that seat, and here's how they voted at the last election or in the past. And so we'll sort of take all of that information, add it to this new seat, and kind of give you a bit of an estimate of where people have been feeling or what they might be feeling. But yes, to go back, Western Sydney is where the Liberal Party held their launch. Western Sydney is one where, it's another kind of make or break area. It's a Labor Party stronghold. It's a mortgage belt area that's increasingly kind of the Liberal Party are trying to grab a hold of. So people that are particularly feeling quite mortgage stressed, really dealing with the cost of living, the Liberal Party have said this is where we need to be focused on, particularly as they kind of lose some of their support in those inner metropolitan seats, those really wealthy blue ribbon seats. They're saying, okay, well, maybe we need to pivot. That's something they said at the last election, that then focus on those outer suburban areas.
Yeah, that was sort of saying that Western Sydney was the most important area, which I think, in some of our reporting, we noted that there's several other areas that might argue about you've given me such a beautiful lead in to talk about housing, which people have asked a lot about, but before we do, I'm going to ignore that amazing segue to ask you one little question, just especially while we wait for people to join. Obviously it takes a while for people to know that we're on. Speaking of like guest lists at these events, it's always a bit star-studded, and by star-studded I mean just old prime ministers. I noticed that there was one prime minister not at the Liberal Party launch. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
I don't think it was any sort of great shock or surprise, but Malcolm Turnbull, former prime minister, was not at the launch. It's sort of well known that he and Peter Dutton aren't friends. Malcolm Turnbull has sort of very publicly criticised Peter Dutton many times before, really. He spoke to ABC Sydney, I think it was this morning, saying that he wasn't invited, but even if he had been invited, he probably wouldn't have turned up, most notably because he does not agree with the coalition's nuclear policy, and basically said he's not going to stand there and support it, even if he had been invited, which he wasn't.
Can I just say, amazing to have the platform to be able to, like, if I could not get invited to a party and then go on radio the next day to explain that actually I wouldn't have wanted to go to the party anyway.
These people aren't quite cool enough for me.
Oh my God. So, if dilly-dallied long enough, can you tell me, big thing was talked about housing as one of the policies. Both of the parties were talking about housing. Could you give me a bit of a breakdown? What's Labor proposing? What are the Liberal National Coalition proposing? Which one? Do the experts like? Give me the whole rundown.
So basically, yeah, massive policies announced by both parties. The Labor Party are basically saying that they've got this program which has existed, which enables you, if you're a first home buyer, to put down a 5% deposit, and then the government will put up sort of 40%. And that will really enable people to get into a home. That will help them with their mortgage payments, which will sort of be lower. And then, what they've done in this case is that they have basically expanded that. So previously there was a cap on the sort of number of people that could do that and join that program. That's been taken off. And the caps for the amount that you could spend on a house has also been lifted, sort of understanding that like the previous caps meant that you could barely afford anything. So now in Sydney, it's around $1.5 million that you can spend up to. In Brisbane, it's around $1 million. Melbourne, it's 950,000. So that's one of the sort of big ones that they've announced there. On the coalition side, they've basically said that you can, if you're a first home buyer, offset your mortgage payments with your tax. And so up to this first sort of $650,000 of your mortgage. Neither of those are particularly positively received by economists and experts. I'll say as well, on the Liberal side, they've also previously promised to allow a first home buyer to take up to $50,000 of their super payments to pay for a deposit. But yeah, it's really not been particularly well received by economists. Two that the Guardian's spoken to today, Chris Richardson and Saul Leslake, have just said that the main thing that this will do will drive up prices. They say that the Liberal Party's policy is worse than Labor's in terms of the price impact that it will have, but both parties have come out and said this morning that they don't think and they don't believe that it will drive up prices significantly, although, yeah, that's been disputed.
Well, if they say it won't, I'm sure it'll be fine, right?
Well,
so the main sort of difference is Liberals is more about how you actually pay for your mortgage in terms of getting back on taxes. Labor's sort of saying we'll build some houses, some extra houses, and also you can use this expanded existing system of paying a smaller deposit.
Yeah, sorry, I should say, like, that's all on the sort of demand side. On the supply side, Labor have promised 100,000 new homes just for first home buyers. Oh, yeah. That one's kind of like we're still sort of waiting for details on how that would actually work, what sort of homes, where they would be. And that's on top of their promise of 1.2 million homes to be built over 5 years and like more sort of social and affordable housing. On the Liberal side, they've promised around $5 billion to go to councils to help things like, fixing sewage lines, roads, transport, that sort of stuff, so that you'd make it easier to build new blocks of housing where you might sort of struggle to otherwise, or make sure that you have the resources. They say that'll unlock around 500,000 homes. Again, that number's kind of disputed.
For sure. Pat from Instagram was keen to know what the Greens' response to both of these announcements was.
So Adam Bandt was out a little bit earlier today. He basically said, it's a line he said before, but he called it a battle of the Band-Aids. The Greens have been calling for basically negative gearing and capital gains tax changes to stop the sort of incentive for people to buy more homes and rent them out, or possibly even not rent them out, and also kind of reclaim that money, put that into a lot more social and affordable housing. So that's where they really stand there. And they've said that, in the case of a minority government, which is looking, I don't know whether you could say likely, but is definitely a possibility. They've said that they've really tried to, they want to push Labor on those fronts.
For sure. And we had another person ask, Tripitaka was interested to know if any party had made plans to put unhoused people into unused homes. That's obviously been a big talking point about how we've got homes and we've got people without homes, but it's not an overlap.
I actually don't know. I'm going to have to go check on that one and I'll let you know.
Yeah, I mean, assuming given it's a lot of it is private property, that's obviously a thing that
it's definitely a tricky area.
Yeah, not the key, so keen to touch. Moving on from housing, Labor also announced an automatic tax deduction. And I'm going to be honest with you, I don't fully understand how this works. And I saw there was a couple of people online today who were a bit confused about that as well. Would you be able to break us down what's actually going on there?
Yeah, so basically at the moment you can claim up to like $300 in your tax return without kind of itemizing those returns and the receipts. So it's basically just a way, if you're an individual, so not necessarily, not if you're a business, or not if your sole income, I think, is from business, because you have access to a lot of other like tax deduction programs. This is basically increasing the threshold from $300 to $1,000 so that it can make it much easier for you to claim back, things that you need for work that that you have to use for work and that you have to pay for. So just kind of making that a lot easier to do, which again they say is like a cost of living measure. That only comes in around the financial year of 2026-27, so it's still quite a while away. And Albo was asked about that, as to why it would take so long to do that. And he basically said that it was the Australian Tax Office, the ATO, that said, well, we need that time to figure it out. And so that would be an appropriate time to set it up. No stress.
For the
So
live
yeah,
stream.
I had to
An
do everything
important
in my power not to like stop and stare and comment.
he's appeared even on live TV moments very
Yes,
occasionally. He's well accustomed to the limelight.
very
So
cute.
okay, so you can get up to $1,000 back for taxes. That was sort of a lot of what Labor announced. Can we talk about what the Liberals laid out? Because I think it was, at least for me, probably the most bang, bang, bang list of kind of that I'd seen of what the Liberals and the coalition, of course, with the Nationals as well, were really sort of standing for at the election. I don't think I'd seen it really laid out like that before.
Hmm. Yeah, so one of the other things that they announced, which was interesting, because they had previously said that they weren't going to, when Labor had brought out their kind of top up tax cuts, to cut the tax within that sort of uh, what's that bracket, 42,000 to 18,000 to $45,000 bracket. The coalition said that they wouldn't match that, that they would repeal that, and it wasn't
Mhm.
looking particularly likely that they were going to lower tax. But what they've kind of done and said is that they're going to offer a one-off $1,200 tax break for people, which would come into effect at the end of the next financial year, so 2025-26, and that
Mhm.
is for people within the sort of 44,000 to 104,000, sorry, 48,000 to $104,000 income bracket. And then if you're 104 to 144,000, you get sort of lower, tapering off tax back. And then same if you're under 48,000, like tapers off on that side as well. So that's one of the other things that they announced.
So it's a one-off rather than sort of a continuing, but for a larger amount. So Labor's sort of accounted to it ends up being about sort of 500 a year, where this would be 1,200,
1,200 for
but
1 year for
all in
like,
one go.
yeah, and sort of for less people, but basically they've costed it at around $10 billion, whereas Labor's was around 17 billion, I think, over the forward estimates over a couple of years. So that's kind of where, and the Liberal Party have said that, there's like, it was really interesting over the weekend, basically seeing these parties come out and spend heaps of money. And I think people were genuinely quite surprised. Some of us in the gallery included at how big a spend they were prepared to make both sides, when they've both accused each other, particularly the Liberals have accused Labor of being too big spenders. And this is a lot of money that they're putting on the table. So, essentially, all of this is here.
For sure. And so can you tell me a bit about, like, what's the messages that Dutton has been giving? There was a few people who were wanting to know and were keen to ask about. He's sort of started a bit of a talking a bit tough on crimes. I believe the words "stop the boats" were uttered at the campaign launch, which we have not heard in Australian politics for a few years now. Can you tell me a bit about, yeah, like, what's I guess, the sort of vibe that Dutton's going for.
Yeah, it was really interesting seeing what he talked about on Sunday. So, as you mentioned, Stop the Boats was one that was mentioned. It's not one we've heard about a lot recently, although you might remember when we had some of those immigration detainees who were released by the High Court, there was this big kind of broader chat again around Operation Sovereign Borders and dual citizens and that sort of stuff. So, security has tended to be the Liberals' kind of bread and butter, one of the areas that they'll go to or go back to, and they'll always try and sort of point out that they've been stronger on it than Labor. Labor have said that they've got the exact same policy on Operation Sovereign Borders, as it's called. But yeah, and I mean, it's one of those things as well. It kind of has, I don't know whether you can say escalated in a way, but it's something that they've been talking a lot more this year, and something that I've heard from different Liberal MPs is just that they think that crime is more of an issue, particularly in seats like Victoria, and in Queensland as well. And in Queensland, it was a big state issue at their state election, where crime is an issue. People have been somewhat concerned about that. They've been talking about it more, and the Liberal Party have sort of been making it more into an issue on their platform. So they've gone around to different seats making like local announcements for more security cameras or more floodlights near stadiums or in public areas. So that's something that they've been talking about. A lot that was mentioned during the campaign was an audit of spending on Indigenous Australians and on Indigenous programs. It's not something that's totally new. It's something that they've mentioned before, but it was interesting that it was highlighted in this platform on Sunday as well. So basically, it's something that they've said before. Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price, who is their Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians, she said previously that she also wants to audit the Aboriginal land councils, who the big ones have said that they actually are already audited by the National Audit Office over several years. So, yeah, interesting to see that.
Yeah, for sure. Someone was asking whether there was a link between the Indigenous audit and I guess, the way that the Liberals have been trying to connect Albanese back to the Voice campaign, back saying that, the referendum they sort of claim was a waste of sort of political energy. I think that's a very debatable statement, but that's definitely, and I know a lot of Liberal ads sort of show Dutton in a suit and then Albanese in his Yes shirt and things like that. Are these linked together?
Yeah, I think partly. I mean, it's sort of part of their broader strategy on Indigenous affairs is kind of like they have, when they call Albanese a weak leader, that kind of feeds into part of it that, he'd spent a lot of time and political energy and political capital on the Voice referendum, which did ultimately fail. And I think a lot of Indigenous communities have come out and said, well, what next as well? But the answer to that for the coalition has been to do this auditing, which some have said is not the right way to go about this issue or to move forward in this issue. And I mean, in a way as well, it was sort of strange hearing that that Dutton a couple of weeks ago during the campaign had also mentioned a bit of a thought bubble about going to a referendum again for Indigenous recognition, which is something that they had been arguing for at the time, that they didn't mind or would support a referendum on recognition only, but without setting up the
With
Voice.
Yeah, with
So yeah.
he's also had a bit of a thought bubble about, I mean, we were just mentioning about dual citizenships, about whether that we could sort of revoke dual citizenships or deport dual citizens. I'm sorry, I can't quite remember the exact details. He's had a few sort of little referendum thoughts pop up, hasn't he?
Yeah, there were 3 that were announced kind of on the same weekend, which was in an interview with The Australian. So the dual citizen one was to give ministers the power to be able to deport dual citizens who are
Mm.
criminals or, convicted of criminal activity. But then they kind of walked that back, and James Paterson the next day had said, oh, no, like, we're not going to do them. But if there was one that we would consider, it would be on the criminal dual citizens, but then sort of walked that back even further and said that would only happen with bipartisan support, which of course there wouldn't be. They know how important bipartisanship is, because that is one of the main reasons why the Voice referendum didn't go up either. Well, I think that we've lost Matilda there temporarily, but let me keep
Um,
talking your ear off. Oh, here you are.
sorry, if I I've gone back. That was again, who knows?
Me too.
This is a slightly different topic, but there's been a couple of headlines about little awkward moments, I guess, between Labor ministers or Labor members. Someone, Selena from TikTok, asked, "Did anyone catch the interaction between Chris Minns and Albo? Is there potentially factional warfare going on within Labor?" So that's a big question, but I know that there was also that moment with Albanese and Plibersek as well. I was keen to, yeah, get your take on not just Labor versus Liberal, but Labor versus Labor.
Yeah, I mean, the factions are a beast of their own. I have missed the Minns moment, and I will go back and have a little
I
watch.
Look, honestly, I threw that at you very much as a curveball. I've missed it too. I think Selena might be ahead of both of us on this one.
Incredible work, Selena. You've given
Yeah.
me some homework to do. The Tanya Plibersek moment was a bit of an awkward one. I mean, I think it's sort of known at this point that Albanese and Plibersek aren't like the closest of friends, the best of friends, the closest of confidants. But yeah, if you go back and have a look, it was a bit of an awkward moment. And then she was asked about, I mean, for those who didn't see it, basically Albo's kind of walking along the line, greeting all the, the Labor bigwigs. Penny Wong's there, Julia Gillard was there, Richard Marles is there, and they all kind of Jim Chalmers is there. They get like a handshake or a backslap, and with Julia Gillard, Albo like held her hand and held it in the air. But when it came to Tanya Plibersek, she kind of came in to give him a hug and a kiss, and he basically held her hands and like stopped her from doing that, and it was a little awkward. And she was asked about it on Sunrise this morning on a panel with Barnaby Joyce, and basically, tried to sort of smooth out, they're still friends, they're still sort of cool with each other, but then it was a bit sort of weird as well that Tanya Plibersek's office had put out a release with the transcript, but sort of left out a few of the kind of awkward back and forth from the end of that interaction when it was Natalie Barr kind of asking, are you still buddies? Are you still friends? And anyway, they had to rectify that and come out with another transcript which had all of that sort of gory detail in it.
Yeah, interesting. And for people who don't know, Tanya Plibersek, big player within the Labor Party, but during the Albanese administration, if you will, has sort of been popped to the side, sort of not that environment should be the side, but it kind of has been tucked away slightly, hasn't kind of had the ascendancy that I think some people thought that she was on the trajectory for in the new leadership.
Totally.
Is that fair to say? Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, so she and Albanese are both in the left faction of the Labor Party in New South Wales. So, that sort of in a way makes them leadership rivals. And so what happened was Plibersek was the deputy leader for Bill Shorten, who was a member of the Victorian right. So you normally have a right and a left. So Albanese's New South Wales right, and his deputy Richard Marles is he's Labor left in New South Wales, and Richard Marles is Victorian right. But basically, after Bill Shorten had lost his leadership, Tanya Plibersek a few years later said, well, she thinks that she could have won it and she had the numbers to do so if she had tried, but she didn't because there were a few family issues that were going on at the time, and that meant that she didn't end up contesting the leadership. But yeah, I think that she is popular, the public likes her, and it's fair to say that Albanese has sort of put her on the side during this term.
Well, with the beautiful conclusion of awkward hand bumps, awkward, just grabbing each other's hand, why don't we say an awkward goodbye while we wait for the live stream to go offline? As always, thank you so much, Krishani. I've thrown so much at you, and you've been, as always, just the most wonderful, informative person at helping breaking it all down. I really appreciate it.
Absolute joy. Thank you, Matilda.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We will